Hi, everyone. It's show time. Let's take a second and make sure that our phones are set to silent before we get started. Give me a thumbs up. All good? Thank you, guys. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for your patience. I know we're getting started a little late. We had a bit of a bottleneck here with the seating chart, but I think everybody found their spot, and we are ready to get going. So let's do this. Dear members, guests, friends of the IIDA, Pioneers in Design is one of several annual events hosted every year to celebrate truly pioneering work that demonstrates innovation and inspiration. I'm supposed to be advancing the slides too, so sorry. I'm going to catch up. That's me. Okay, I forgot the clicker. So, Pioneers in Design, as I mentioned, is a great event, and we are really hoping that you will walk away inspired. We all draw inspiration from a variety of sources, right? So I really appreciate and thank all of you on behalf of the committee that has put this event together and all of our organization. Thank you for gathering with us tonight for a dose of inspiration and wonder, as you see captured here perfectly in the Webb telescope imagery behind me. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our first in-person Pioneers Design event in 3 years. So the last time we've gathered here was in 2019. And in 2019, we didn't have the Webb telescope. We only had the Hubble. So this image would be much, much fuzzier. So today we gather here again to share the stories and honor the excellence of design and of our community under one roof. Before we get to tonight's programming, I would like to touch on the work IIDA does to advocate for advancements of education, design excellence, legislation, leadership, and community outreach with the aim to increase the public's understanding of interior design as a profession that adds value and positively impacts the well-being of people and their lives. Along with great events, like tonight, our chapter board, city centers, and committees work tirelessly throughout the year to elevate the profession of interior design with a lot of effort put into EDI, advocacy, professional development and mentorship, climate action, student outreach, philanthropy, and other programs. So please check our website often for all the things that are happening. I would like to express my special thanks to Verda Alexander, our immediate past president, who has led these efforts with passion, dedication, and conviction over the past year. Thank you, Verda. As we kick off the new year with a new board, advance the slide, here we go, which I would like to highlight. So we have a new board. We're looking to really continue the work that we have been doing to date and build on it. But we also want to expand our reach and engage more intentionally with strategic partners outside and inside of our design community for the betterment of the places that we work and live in. Focusing on design for good and the idea of good citizenry is what will drive our efforts in the coming year. So none of the work that we do would be possible without the support of our chapter patrons and sponsors, so I would like to thank them. So first, thank you to our patrons. Barcelona, Platinum. We also have two as our Platinum sponsor. Gensler as Gold. And all of these wonderful silver patrons. And bronze. And finally, nickel. Thank you, everyone. Oh, one more, design, sorry. Save the best for last. So thank you to our patrons. Also, I would like to thank our sponsors for tonight's event. So at the 5-star level, we have Principal Builders. At 4-star, we have CRI and Shaw, Contra. And then we have 3-star sponsors. Thank you. And tonight's special drink in the reception that will start sometime after 7:30 now, since we started a little late. We have a gin and tonic special brought to us by Moha Group. So look out for that. As I've mentioned, this takes a village to bring together all of the little parts that put together these wonderful events for us. So I would like to thank the committee that has worked really hard on this for the last several months. So thank you everyone who has been involved in making this happen. It's a lot of hard work and text and coordination and emails and fracting backs and forth, but here we are, so thank you very much. And finally, tonight's presentation is accredited for CEU. So if you would like to get credit for tonight's presentation with your continued education credits, that's available. You can sign up at the table outside that was set up before and will be available after. And then also you can scan the QR code on the screen from your app, IDC EC app, and it will take you to the course. So with that, we're going to get started with the program. Are you guys ready? Okay. So our first order of event tonight is we are honoring today Chris Kokofer with the Distinguished Achievement Award. Hey, Chris. So the award is given in recognition of significant and consistent contribution of skills, expertise, or service to the profession of interior design as a symbol of respectful appreciation for commitment to the highest levels of performance and engagement. To present the award to Chris Kokofer, I would like to welcome on stage Margie Sullivan, who is a past honoree, who has been a design leader in our community for many years, and is now an artist and a philanthropist. So welcome, Margie.
Design community, hello. I love being here and feeling the vibes tonight. It's so optimistic. It's great. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in the design community for 4 decades. I graduated from CCA when it was CCAC. And when I joined IIDA, it was called IBD. I worked for design, I worked in textiles, the dealerships, public relations. I'm currently the chairman, I'll call him my chairman, of the board of Project Color Core. And I want to get a big shout out to Laura, who may or may not be here, but she's got a ticket. And to our Bay Area chapter. We have a new Bay Area chapter, and they are currently fundraising for a school, Hoover Elementary, in Oakland, and they need your help. I also opened a art gallery, Point Richmond Art Gallery, during my graduation, I would say, from working. And our next large show is going to feature Doug Whitnable, so you'll all be invited. Early October. I cut out a lot of this because they said we're running late. I've known Chris for most of her career. She is one of those very special people who has integrity, guts, experience, and a killer laugh. She has been successful in every avenue that she has carved out. Being a mother of 2, heeding the unusual call to purchase the Oakland-based Kate Chesterfield 10 years ago, and turning it into a national recognized leader in reuse and sustainability. Chris was also in the room when it happened, when the dealership 2 conceived of our community's very successful charity event. Chris gave the chairs for many years so that you designers could make magic with them, which you have. Before I go on, I just want to tell you how important this is to me that you are honoring our good friend, Chris, and I'm thrilled to invite her and all her energy to the stage.
Oh boy. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Margie. All right, so I do have a little script I'm just going to read, but so I am thrilled and grateful that the IIDA Northern California chapter chose to highlight Kay Chesterfield's vision, passion, and hard work to prevent office furniture from going into our landfills. For those of you that don't know Kay Chesterfield, we are a 100-year-old reupholstery company. We're actually, I'm ad-libbing now, we're actually 101. But the pandemic screwed up my birthday party. I can't wait to talk to everyone here about how we can keep well-built, well-designed furniture in use for a long time. However, I was asked by Bert and Verda to talk about my career path. So how did I get here? Many of you, I'm going to do air quotes like you, Margie, older people have watched my career path here locally, but some of you don't know that I actually was in the hotel business in Cincinnati for a while. However, at 29, I fled my hometown, the 24/7 hospitality industry, my beer-drinking friends, and my family. I flew to San Francisco with 3 suitcases, slept on my friend's floor on Divisadero Street, and started night classes in interior design. And I've had a couple jobs along the way to pay the bills. The first couple of years, I had a few inconsequential jobs until the lucky day I landed a job at Fax, which was a Hayworth dealership. And I don't know where Molly is, but thank you, Molly Griffin. She got me into the industry. We both went to Indiana University. Let me find my place. Anyway, with Fax, I could not believe how smart, creative, fun, and organized this company was. It was my sweet spot. This company and this industry forever changed my life. And I made lifelong friends, starting with Fax, and I call them my chosen family. However, it was my time as an A&D market manager at Technion that was the most pivotal. I learned to speak in front of a group. I had 3 amazing female mentors, Susan Quinton, Margie Sullivan, and Cindy Ogle. I was graciously allowed to spend many work hours supporting a growing IIDA chapter. At that time, AIA were the cool people. We had to make ourselves cool. And the best part, my job was to help and to get to know all the interior designers in the Bay Area. In our careers, everyone needs that one break, that one mentor that lifts you up. Susan Quinton did that for me. Is she here? I don't know. As a junior A&D rep, every time we walked into a design firm, Susan would say, "You have got to know Chris Kokefer." During my 5 years at Technion, there was not an IIDA event that I missed. I even co-chaired Pioneers in Design for 3 years. Anyhow, I remember the day I attended a certain forum, and I was blown away by Jan Stensland and her talk on sustainability and human health. It was the first time I heard that Windex and air fresheners were toxins and that they were entering our bodies. I can also picture the time I talked to Laura Grigsby, who then was a Gensler designer, and I can picture it perfectly. We were standing in line for something, and I said, "Do you know what I think it's sustainability means?" We both shrugged, but I was intrigued. I loved being the ambassador for all things environmental, human health, and sustainability for Technion. Being on the West Coast made me the unofficial protester, pleading the case to Technion headquarters for what designers such as Melissa Mizell, Robin Bass, and Jean Hansen wanted for their projects. And this was products free of toxins. I then went on to own Cocafer and Company. We were a multi-line rep group focused on customer service first and sales second. There was not much environmental impact with this role, but I do remember chasing the darn red list information from my manufacturers for the Google projects. It wasn't until I decided to purchase Kay Chesterfield 10 years ago that I got the chance to stand on a new soapbox called reuse and make my own way, shaping a centuries-old trade and modernizing it to meet the needs of the contract furniture industry. There are so many reasons that I like this role. I get to see every textile imaginable go through my shop. I get to see furniture transform before my eyes. And the feel-goods of reuse. And, best part, I still have all my industry friends that I get to work with. Sounds really dreamy, right? Well, it is, but it's also been a hell of a learning curve. Trying to get the prices right, trying to be profitable, perfectionism. You guys don't know anything about that. Language barriers, culture barriers. So that's just to name a few. So good and bad times aside, I've spent the last 10 years observing, working steadily, learning, making mistakes, and gearing up for what our planet needs now. I have watched ancillary specialist become a new job title, resi-mercial become a verb, and the statistics keep coming. Did you know that 90% of contract office furniture ends up in landfill? And the really sad part is that the items our industry creates are made from they're made really well. We've got BIFMA. They can withstand more than one use. They should go on to second users and third users and so on. And what about the pandemic and all the predictions about hybrid working? We're still trying to guess, but one thing that is crystal clear, and all of you reps out there know this, there is a significant jump in soft seating in offices. We have all learned that you can desk at home, but you want a sofa at the office. So let's take care of what our industry produces. And here are my challenges for you tonight, if you have any control. 1, please consider reusing 20% of your client's product when you're redoing their space. I'm not asking for 100%. I know we still want to sell lots of good, inventive furniture. The second one is to please include instructions for your client on move-in day or maybe a day later on how to refresh, reupholster, and reuse the new furniture they just got. And you really do need to do it that day because everybody forgets. So it needs to be done right away. I feel so incredibly fortunate to be noticed and to have the chance to tell you all this evening. Many of you are doing incredible and inventive things to reduce landfill waste. We're all thinking about it already. So let's continue. We're on the West Coast to be the first in the country to do these hard things. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Congrats, Chris. I love the work that you're doing. Where's my introducer? I guess we had to cut them because of time as well. No, I'm just joking. I think all of you know me. I get to say this today for the first time to all of you. I am now your immediate past president of IIDA Northern California. I'm very, yes. And I'm very excited to have Yana follow in my footsteps. She's already doing way better of a job than I ever did within the first month that she started. So I get to introduce Walter. I'm going to do this quickly so that we can move on to the program. And Walter Hood. He is the creative director and founder of the Oakland-based Hood's Design, I almost said group, Hood Design Studio, described as a tripartite social art and design practice working in the areas of art, landscape, and urbanism. He is also an educator at heart. He's been a professor at the University of California at Berkeley longer than he's been in practice, for over 30 years. And I guess I learned just now, that his practice came out of his teaching. He actually was my professor at Berkeley back in the day, a long time ago, and also my thesis advisor. And so he profoundly inspired me and my career, and I am still learning from him to this day. He continues to lecture and inspire students around the world. Walter Hood has made significant contributions in art, landscape architecture, all kinds of stuff. I'm going to skip all your awards because he told me that I could. You can look them up if you want. I had like 5 just from the last 2 years listed. So he's exhibited at MoMA, and he has a recent book that I just bought while I was in New York at the Strand bookstore, Black Landscapes Matter, about how race, memory, and meaning intersect in the American landscape, and it's in its 3rd publication already. Walter works across disciplines to uncover erased memories, reveal cultural histories, present multiple narratives, and empower communities. Over his career, he has transformed traffic islands, vacant lots, freeway underpasses into spaces that challenge the legacy of neglect of urban neighborhoods. The idea of memory has an important place in Walter's research and practice. And although much of his work is about bringing out the past, I think he is ultimately interested in the future. As he states in his introduction to this book, to counter the colonial malaise, it is up to us in the field of design to develop a prophetic aesthetic so that we can remember, a prophetic aesthetic. I love that. And to develop new futures from the power of the past. It is my honor to welcome our IIDA Northern California 2022 Pioneer Honoree, Walter Hood. Take a seat. Let me finish this little bit real quick. So when Walter and I were talking last couple of weeks about what he would do, he was lamenting the lack of design debate and discussion these days. And so we decided that we would do something a little different tonight, and we're going to have a conversation with you. And at 20 minutes to the hour, we'll have you all join us and ask questions. All right. And I think we're live. Mic'd?
I think we're live.
I think it'll
Yep.
switch over. Yeah.
Yep.
There we go.
Awesome.
So much for an intimate conversation. I think they can hear everything we say, Walter.
That's okay. We'll just like keep it low, right? If we talk low, maybe they won't hear us.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, to start this off, I thought just so you can kind of talk a little bit about your background for those that don't know much. We started our practices within the same year.
That's
Primo's
funny.
actually over there. Huh. Yep. And when we started workplace design, we were on this trajectory. We wanted to improve the workplace, make things better, bring down cubicle walls. But gosh, over 30 years, so much has happened, and especially in the last decade, we feel like we're dodging bullets, navigating all these storms, and our trajectory has gone completely haywire. Love to hear how your practice has changed and evolved over the last 30 years.
That's a good question. I mean, one way it's changed is I have people now, and they're over here. So there's my studio right here. And I think that's a really big change for me because for over a decade, it was just myself and a few people. And so over the last decade, it's been really great to have a body of work and have a group of people join me and have that conversation and to really think about what is the future. But, you know, starting out, you mentioned that a lot of my work started through academia. And I was inspired by my professors who had offices in the city, but would come over to Berkeley and teach. This is just running in the background.
Okay. I thought they were not working, but it was just blank for a second. Okay, sorry about that.
And so I was like, wow, you can teach and have a practice. And actually, you could actually have a practice that was like teaching, meaning you could be radical, right? Just not in the halls of Berkeley, but you could actually take that same thing out because you had a paycheck. And this is what people don't understand. It's like if you have a full-time job, you can have a hobby, which is an office. And in a way, the studio was a hobby, and it was a way for me to get tenure, which is, you know, when you're at the university, you have to do research. And it took me a couple years to figure out that design could be research. And that if I asked different questions, that then led me down a path of research. And so very early in the studio, you actually have the little book. I started asking these different questions. And these questions were about, well, why do places look the way they look? And why do we keep making them the same way, even though we don't like the way they look, right? I mean, if you go to the Tenderloin, if you go to a lot of our sort of unvalued spaces in the world, we constantly keep them that way, right? Nonprofits go into low-income areas, and they stay that way. So my office is in West Oakland. Nonprofits have been there for 30 years, and it's actually gotten worse. So I started asking then, well, why is it? Because in a way, they need that condition to get money. And so I started asking just different questions. So I said in this book, if I design places based on how people were living, would it be different? And so I designed a park for a thief. You know, I think the thief sits around, waits for you to park your car, pops your radio, goes back to the park, and then on Friday, the park is a place to go and buy radios, right? But that's the kind of thing, you know, or I think there was, in my next book, there was a drive-through brothel, which, you know, I was watching sex acts on the street, and little kids, there was an elementary school across the street from my studio, and I would watch kids come down the street, and it was as if the sex was invisible, right? Of course, it was an everyday occurrence, so it wasn't special. So we designed a brothel that was the size of a car space, so that when you saw this red car space with the doors closed, people were having fun. When it was open, people were faking. But it was a way to begin to say, look, if you looked at the world, then you would react in a different way. And that actually became the kind of the DNA of the studio.
I love that you challenge everything.
Yeah. And people were freaked out. I mean, this exhibit was in Ghirardelli Square because I had a friend who was a curator for a space down there. And I remember on opening day, all these tourists were walking through, and they were reading because in the book, for each design, there was a narrative. And you would just see the face of these people. They're like, why is this at Ghirardelli Square? Why are we talking about prostitutes and drugs? So it was awesome. It was awesome.
Oh my God, you don't back down. We'll talk about another project later on where you say, well, we'll let people figure it out, right? And it makes me think of, when I was doing some research for today, I thought for sure I'd find placemaking in there. And another term that you challenge, it's been lauded as this concept that is going to connect, it's going to reimagine space, collectively, that's going to be the way we can design to bring out culture and all of that. But you don't use that term. You talk about a cultural practice, and you practice culturally.
Well, places, again, I think, as you guys know, it's so easy into design for us to come up with a brand, a word that basically labels a strategy. And once that strategy gets labeled, you're not doing a strategy anymore. It's like we were talking earlier about how design now is Pinterest, right? You go into a meeting, and there's the Pinterest page. It's like, huh? Why are we looking at Pinterest, right? But that has become the strategy. And so for me, placemaking gets in the way of seeing the world. And so if I say, I'm going to have a placemaking, workshop in this community, that means that I don't see the community.
You also said it assumes that there's nothing.
That there's nothing there, and I
with.
can just go in and make a place. Yeah. And if you think about, place comes out of place. If you think of urban design, it's Place Mayor in Madrid. It was the spot. And so if you really think about place, as I was coming over, I was thinking about this question. And when I moved here, Broadway in Columbus was the place. Right? You could imagine it. Carol Doda, the big jugs, the thing. But it was the place, you went there. It was the place. Yeah. And when you said Broadway in Columbus, it conjured in people's imagination. They knew what it was. And now, since we place make everywhere, everything's the same. And so even when I come to the city, there's no distinct spot anymore. They're all ubiquitous to a certain degree. And it made me think of, once had a professor said, would you want one great space or 100 mediocre spaces? And it always stuck with me, and I think Americans, we would rather have 100 mediocre spaces because we don't really want to be together, right? In this country, we don't really want to be together because when you go outside, it's like, people have their spots, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I do think maybe 60 years ago, there were more places because we got really good at living and having two worlds. And when we had two worlds, there was the white world and the black world. People would go to one place, like the courthouse square. I'm from the South. Everybody would be there except the black folk. The black folk would not be at the courthouse, right?
They'd be there on Saturday.
But they would be on Saturday because we were allowed. But really then thinking about that, I think our biggest thing in design is how do we want to live together? And why do we want to keep duplicating spaces? And why can't we arrive at the place together or a spot together? And I do think that's the future that we have to figure out. And it's actually cutting through our world as we sit here today. In our politic, in our economy, everything is tied to this idea of how do we live together? Yeah. And I think design is that tool. Yeah. Right, when you think about
that makes sense. We get grumpy if the skateboarders are going by, or the old ladies are playing their bingo. It's always something, right? Interesting. All right. So
Sorry to get deep.
No, already. You already answered all my questions. All right, we've got a room full of architects and designers. Love to talk about a few of your projects. We've got them scrolling in the back where you've collaborated with architects. And you told me that you love architecture that has a clear idea and a context where you can have a conversation with the site and the envelope of the space and go back and forth. And you mentioned a few projects like NVIDIA and the Broad and the De Young.
Yeah, architecture, as you guys know, as interior, it's easy to get subserviated in the process, right? That you're the last one to the table. Everything is done. It's like, oh, give me some furniture, right? Or give me some bushes, versus starting in the beginning as a team and trying to kind of work through and really thinking about, well, what is the idea that we're trying to create collectively? And I would say, it's far and few between the collaborators that we've been able to work with. We've been able to work with some really good designers who open everything up. And my first experience with this was at the De Young with Herzog and Dimeron, where, Jacques was more the artist, Pierre was more the architect, And that created an environment where looking at everything from chairs to the building wall to landscape, it was just one big conversation. And they never made drawings of what the building would look like, which freaked the client out. Right? You would be at these meetings and they'd be like, so what's the elevation? Oh, we don't know. You know? It's like, so what does it look like? Oh, we don't know. And they bought a big building down in the south of San Francisco, and it was a mock-up warehouse. And we just mock things up. And you would go in, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so that's when we started putting mock-ups in our contract, right? But this idea that, you know, the drawing could not actually talk about the process that you were going through. And really, they started with the chain link fence. I remember sitting in a meeting, and Pierre comes in, he's got a piece of chain link fence, and he started, this is what we want to make the building wall out of. And people are like, and they must have gone through maybe a half or maybe 24 ideas before they arrived at the copper paneling. And to watch that, that was something that I hadn't seen in America in the process. And so again, tried to copy everything. But working with, you know, really good architects who have ideas allow for people working in all the trades to actually find a place and have a conversation.
You said they had an idea about a
tripartite scheme where they were like, we have 3 bars. The front bar is public, the middle bar is circulation, and the back bar is private. And this idea that the landscape would go through the public. And that was like, wow, that's awesome. Or NVIDIA that you're seeing here with Gensler. You know, we started out tree houses. And that became an idea that the architecture and the landscape worked through this idea of working outside, because our client was like, we have the best climate in the world. Why are we not outside? And that then became a way to talk. And every meeting we would come in with models, and it was just this amazing way. And Gensler ended up doing the top canopy, and we did everything underneath. And so it was just an amazing way of thinking. And sometimes it's congruent, or sometimes it's not. At the Broad, Liz Diller came up with the vault in the veil, right? The vault, so there was no landscape coming in the vault, right? And it was just this veil. So how do you deal with this monolithic architecture? And so we didn't try to do a kumbaya. We just tried to sort of be bold enough there. And so we used trees, you know, just trees. And so it gives you just different ways to have conversations. And the other thing is hopefully you notice, every project looks different, right? That there's not a shtick. There's not a kind of a thing that you see everywhere, because it's really coming out of the place, the process, and the ideas.
Yeah. All right, when we approached you, you came back with this title, Memory in Landscape Architecture. And so memory is obviously very big to you. You've done a lot of research and applied it to so many of your projects, especially your more recent projects. And I want to go back to an old professor at UC Berkeley, theory professor. I took a few classes of his, Mark Tribe. He, in my research, discovered that he did a symposium called Memory plus Architecture in 2007, and he stated that memory is the trace of all that has gone before. How do you define memory?
I define memory as very similar, but I don't have a definition, so I have to use an example. I think it's Toni Morrison said this. It's like, the Mississippi River used to flow. They straighten it out. When they straighten it out, they remove the memory. And that's a really powerful way to think about the past and how we remember, right? That we use we have all these, ways to not remember, right? I think we construct a world so that we want it to be straight. We don't want it to be like this. But I don't know about you guys, but my past is messy. You know, it moved all over the place. And of course, when I try to go back to certain things, I have to kind of form it. But memory is this kind of messy thing that drifts and wanes. And it's there if you should be able to go there if you want to. But in some places, it's been straightened out. And for a lot of people, They don't see those oxbows anymore.
Well,
And
you can't go there if it's
if
erased,
gone,
if it's not there.
Yeah, and so in those, I started out talking about devalued landscapes. In a lot of places, the river has been straightened out because the power of the river was too much, right? And that's more in this kind of post-colonial landscape, right? I mean, that kind of erasing thing. So this is like, West Oakland. Every 5 years, my students are like, Professor Hood, I discovered West Oakland. This is an amazing place. Can you read my article? And if I have to read that article one more time, 7th Street was the jazz place. It's the same thing, and it's been straightened out to this point where I had a student last year when I did a memory seminar, a Latino student, and he went back and he was like, Professor Hood, I didn't know there were Mexicans in West Oakland, and that there was these Mexican theaters on 7th Street. But through that kind of straightening out, it's gone. It's only black folk now. And so people look at West Oakland as, this place where only black folk, but we all came there. When the trains ended, all the minorities were there. And I'm talking Western European, Italians, Portuguese. We were all there working on the rail yards.
Yeah.
And that's why 7th Street was amazing, right? But it's been so defined that we don't have those breadcrumbs anymore. And so our projects try to sort of get out of that straight and narrow and take you over there and over here so that you can actually get back there.
Yeah, it's interesting how they just want to distill it to one thing, right?
Because it's easy, it's so easy to
Easier to
say it
understand,
was this
maybe.
thing versus, again, it's messy getting in the mess, I talked about Columbus and Broadway because to me that was San Francisco, but it was, X-rated movies, I think, started here in San Francisco. I mean, this was like, it came out of this culture, but somehow it's just been erased.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we can't talk about that stuff today with the tech. Right? It just doesn't fit, so let's get rid of it, and let's only talk about the tech.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, one more Mark Tribe quote. Is he still there?
He's still around, but he's not teaching. He's retired. Okay. He's writing books.
All right.
Many books.
That makes sense. All right, I love this quote. Memory haunts not only the derelict house, but also the vibrant plaza. I think you kind of addressed this a little bit, but I think this idea of haunting, is a lot about what you address in your work.
Yeah, I love ghosts. I love the haints. My grandmother used to call them haints. I'm from North Carolina, but
What
it
is
was
it? Haints?
Haints. I mean, but this notion that we're not alone in these places, and that memory does provide. And there is certain spaces have these auras, and you can actually feel it, right? And I really believe that there are these untold narratives that are just below the surface, and if you listen, that you can actually hear them, if you want to. And some of this comes, from a strong mythical way of thinking about the world, but I like to think that there has to be something more, right, than the kind of the ordinary. And in other cultures, like in Rome, I spent a year in Rome, Campo de Furia, I'm writing this article now, and most people go to Campo de Furia, the Piazza of Flowers, they go to hang out, students go there to get drunk, you can buy anything at the market. But in the middle of the piazza is the statue, and it's of a guy in a hood. And I must have gone to this place 100 times and never noticed it. And then I was reading this book on Michelangelo, and they talked about Bruno the Heretic. It's in Campo de Furia. I was like, there's no Bruno the Heretic. So I go down, there he is, Bruno the Heretic. This statue, like 30 feet tall, and this guy was burned at the stake.
Oh, gosh.
Right? The Pope and the people drug him, put a nail in his tongue, and drug him to Campo de Furia and burned him because he said the world, that there were stars and that there was a galaxy. He and Galileo were hanging out in the Janicula, and they were like telling those lies, and they got Bruno. And every year, people come back and remember Bruno. And of course, the church had been trying to get rid of Bruno. But I always go back to that because, Bruno is there to remind us. And of course, they want to get rid of Bruno. but also there's the life in the piazza. There's
Yeah.
happiness and joy.
Yeah.
And Bruno is there. And just ending, and it kind of coincides with Baldwin, Jimmy Baldwin, when he comes to San Francisco in the late 40s. He's hanging out in the Fillmore, and the guy says, look at that couple over there. And there's a black couple dancing, and a guy next to him is smoking a cigarette. And he's like, what do you see? And Baldwin says something to the fact that I see joy and pain. And he was saying that this is what we as black folk, we're kind of born knowing who we are, and we carry that around, and we're able to laugh and feel pain at the same time. And that's always stuck with me because as a kid growing up, my grandfather, when he died, we had to wake in his house. He was in the living room, we were in the kitchen eating, and he was in the living room, right? And as a kid, I'm sitting there going, Grandpa's in the living room, right? But this idea that, death and these things, sorrow is there, second line in New Orleans, you march out solemn and you come back celebrating. And again, I think we should be able to do that more in space, but we tend to have spaces only for sorrow, spaces for joy, and then spaces for the mundane. Versus, again, going back to if we had one space where it could actually capture all of that.
Well, I have to now then ask about Gadsden's Wharf and the ghosts there, right?
Yeah.
And that's the site of the
Yeah.
International African American Museum in Charleston, right? And that's a pretty powerful place. And I think there's joy, there's sorrow,
Yeah.
there's serenity, there's all kinds of things there.
Yeah, if you've been to Charleston before 2020, Charleston's a different place today, right? I mean, before...
Really? Because I was there, God, I want to say 2018,
Yeah.
and it was pretty different then.
Oh, they still had that guy in Marion Square. They were still doing weddings at Middleton Plantation, right? I mean, people weren't called out for having weddings at plantations, but Charleston is a city that, at the early part of the 20th century, they decided they had to rewrite the narrative because there were more slaves in Charleston than free people. And the narrative was, you go to Charleston, you're going to see more slaves than others. And so they were like, okay, we can't use the word slavery, so we're going to say servants. And so you hear the servant class used a lot there, right? People don't refer, right? And so in a way, they kind of erased it. And right below the surface, all these spaces are there. And when we were doing the museum, the first site was not at the site. The first site for the museum was 2 blocks away near the aquarium. And thank God it didn't work out. And then Harry Cobb, bless his heart, who just passed away a year and a half ago of Pay Cobb Freed, went down with Mayor Riley, who was like the longest term mayor in the US, I want to say 40 years as a city mayor. Civil rights all the way up, and this museum is his big thing. And Harry said, what about that site? And he saw this park by the water. He was like, it needs to be by the water. And so he calls me, Guy Nordenson, and we go down. And we're in this meeting at the site. And Harry's talking, and I was like, has anyone done archaeology of the site? They're like, no. And the city guy was there, and he started saying, oh, if we start digging, we gotta need hazmat suits, there's all this toxic stuff down below. And Mayor Riley is looking out the window, he's like, why is that guy in a hole down there? And the guy was in a manhole, on the site. He was like, no hazmat suits or anything, right? But that led to an archaeological report, and then a local scholar wrote a paper, and they found Gadsden's Wharf. And
That's
Gadsden's-
crazy. And the
Yeah.
museum was going to be there, and they didn't know the connection?
They didn't know
That is the
because the
craziest
city had
coincidence.
completely erased it. You could go to a map and you would see Gadsden's Wharf, but no one talked about it because, again, this kind of rewriting. And once the archaeology was done, the site was a park. The city then had to go and purchase it. I mean, it was like this long, long trip, but now we know 40 to 50%. And then I heard Charlemagne the God last night on TV. If you guys don't know Charlemagne the God, he's a podcast brother, right? He's talking to Stephen Colbert. He's like, yeah, there's this thing I'm working on down in Charleston. I was like, Charlemagne the God? And he's on the board now. And he made it 50 to 60% of the slave diaspora. So it's become this really important thing. It opens in January.
The slaves all arrived there, many.
There, once they were quarantined, they were out in the pest houses right after the Atlantic crossing. The ones who made it came to Gaston's Wharf. They put them in warehouses until it was time to sell them. And of course, many perished in the warehouses because if you've been to Charleston, it's like frickin', 150 degrees outside. And there are accounts of sharks actually were feeding closer to the harbor because they were throwing dead bodies over. It's just this place where these heinous memories. And so we took a tour of the Low Country for 3 days, came up with a charrette.
This is the project.
And there's this huge Atlantic crossing fountain that we're doing. This is where the warehouse is, and there are these rice Negroes because these were selected young men from West Africa who didn't get the sickle cell, who had sickle cell, who didn't get malaria. This is a new dune that we sort of created, this primary dune when you come in, to talk about we're at the edge because you don't really have a sense of that. And then these are figures from the Brooks map. That was a lithograph, that was a Dutch ship that showed how black bodies were stored. And this will fill up with water, and then it'll go out and there will be these puddles of bodies. And these are 6 foot each, and the inside is made of tabby, which is a material that's scooped out of the Atlantic Ocean. So in a way, this is the bottom of the ocean now on land, and it's a place where daily we have a place to sort of think about our ancestors.
It's absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful. It's an infinity pool.
But to get to that design, all of my beautiful black grandmothers were like, Mr. Hood, we do not want bodies on the ground, right? There was this amazing conversation or working through the figures we're doing. Those were representational figures in the images, but we're doing these abstract black figures because we wanted to look like when slaves arrived at Gadsden, they were not Americans yet. When they left Gadsden, they became African Americans. And so we want to talk about that idea of becoming. And so these bodies are not heroic, there's no chains, but they're just kind of gargoyle-y. And that's been, again, a big issue because black representation, particularly of the figure in this country, black artists have not had that freedom. There's been Betty Sayers and others who kind of pushed at it, but what I call the Samboification of the black figure kind of forced a lot of us to be very careful of representation. Mm-hmm. But we really wanted this to be, again, taking on these subjects. And so this has been a big push. And so I've never done figurative work like this, so it's the first time. We've never done a fountain like this the first time. So this project really has all the pieces, I think, of our practice that has allowed us to really, think deeply about how to create these spaces.
I need to go visit it. So challenging. And the work exposes, in some cases, as you say, difficult burdens of the past, what many might prefer to forget or really don't even want to see. I think it would be hard to stand at the edge of this pool for me.
I'm taken by, designers, how designers shy away from these subjects. Right? And if that's the brief, and then it's like, okay, let's do this. And to me, that's a privilege.
Let's do something pleasant and nice.
But it's privilege.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like, oh, that doesn't mean that to me, right? And not thinking that it might mean something to other people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a privilege when you see certain designers making things. They're very privileged to not be inclusive. Mm-hmm. And that is our burden is, we're not privileged, and so in a way, it's kind of like, well, what do we throw out? We can't say everything always, right? And so every project is full. We're working in Texas now on a CAP project, and it's like a cap. And this cap is for a freeway that ran through a community, and we were having this discussion about, well, the cap isn't really environmental justice, right? The justice is put the houses back. Yeah. Right? That's justice. And no one's thinking about putting the houses back. It's always like, oh, put a soccer field there, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you want to do the justice is the truth. You tore down 50 houses, build 50 more houses. Don't put them in houses we're talking about. And so, again, being able to sort of push back at a lot of this. I just think we need more people doing it so that it can become more strategic as a way of thinking.
Yeah, and people need to, I mean, I also think you have a project in here where it was a site of a shooting, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are
That
tough
was-
subjects, but I think that,
Well, that was a
think-
really tough project. I don't think I ever want to do a project like that again.
yeah, but,
It was,
and I guess we have to experience everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the joy comes out of the pain, right?
but I mean, for the San Bernardino, I mean, there's a picture of me sitting with this Ethiopian family because they lost a member to the massacre. They were, what can I say, they were so happy that the design was not this kind of cookie cutter thing that landed. And I think we got more comments that they didn't think that the county would do something like this for them, which in a way was a way for us of thinking that people get design, right? A lot of times they're like, oh, people are not going to get it. People get when you go out of your way to think about them in a different way through the work. So,
Yeah, it's a way of healing and,
Yeah.
and not forgetting. All right, so you've mostly answered this question, but why is it so important to look at the past? And you use the terms unearth, exhume, uncover, validate, celebrate. Why can't we just look forward? Why is it so critical to look back in order to imagine a better future?
I mean, I think if we were a homogeneous society, that, you know, we all came from the same place, we all believed in the same things, I don't think there would be a big push to always look back to go forward, because that would just be part of, collectively, who we would be. But I think in this experiment in this country, I think there are a lot of people who've just been forgotten. And I don't mean forgotten, it's very early in colonial America, the easiest way, how can I say, to control people were to get rid of their past, right? If I had 10 people came in, and let's say you were all related, and I only call you by your first name for most of your life, and let's say you broke apart, you would never find each other again. But this idea, like in Middleton Plantation, there was a free slave room, and all the slaves' names are written on the wall, no last names. And you're going like, they're Middletons, right? Because they're Middletons, right? But there's no name. And so really thinking about that, that's a very powerful, way of controlling. And I think for us to then go back and have these conversations about the diverse and different makeup of this country, and for us to then think about those shared histories. That's what I was saying about 7th Street. If there are places we can go and there are these shared histories, that's very clear if we choose to go there. And so it's like the Kofi bird in West Africa that can turn its head all the way around and look backwards while flying forward, right? But that idea that, I think we have to keep coming back. Like 3 trees, good example. 2 trees on the outside, Jefferson and Washington. The tree in the middle is Obama. Obama tried to build a library in Jefferson Park and Washington Park, but people forgot he was a president. So they dogged him for building the library. So we made the trees from the fallen trees to talk about that he was a president, if you get what I'm getting at, right? And so he didn't even in his hometown, Chicago, right? He was not seen as Jefferson in Washington. Like in like 1 year, it's like, but it just blows my mind how it's so easy to forget, right? And how do you use design as a way to continue to remember? And it's not that, I don't like making things that are always stuck in the past, but I yearn, we're talking about, I've been reading Boehm's book on nostalgia. I mean, I'm nostalgic about Black communities. I don't want to go back to Jim Crow, but at least I do want to see Black families. So there are things that I can be nostalgic about without having to go back there. And so it's that journey of thinking that I think design can actually be really powerful in having those touchstones. It's like, I love the upholstery work, when you were showing your projects, but that's a way also, right? It's like not throwing everything away.
Yeah.
Like in landscape, you start with the site, scarify the site.
Yeah.
It's like when I first saw that word scarify, I was like, what does that mean? And then you look in the specs, it's like clear and grub. You know, you want to just get rid of everything, and then you want to start new.
Yeah.
And I think if we had this, I had this idea years ago, you always keep 20% of the site before you begin. So my friend from Splashpad, when you go to the market next week, look at the sidewalks on the street. We didn't replace the sidewalks when we did the park. And everybody from the city was like, why didn't we replace the sidewalks? And I was like, there's life there. Lots of people walk, and they weren't bad sidewalks. And so just little things to add to the kind of patina of the world, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah, and celebrate difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, shiny is not, new and shiny is like not that great, you know? Like downtown Oakland is becoming freaking shiny. And I'm like, where's that good, gritty stuff? We were downtown the other day. I was like, this didn't even look like Oakland. It's all shiny.
Yeah.
Because they just erased everything.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Okay, I'm going to skip a couple questions, maybe come back to them if we have time. I'm going to need a time check at some point, Yana. I didn't check what time we were starting. Sorry.
We have lots of time.
Of course, yeah, we have all night.
We have gin coming up. Come on.
So I kind of want to stay on this a little bit. I was going to switch to art and design, but I think I'm going to stick to this a little bit and talk about the monument. And it's a hot topic right now, or has been for the last couple of years. And I'm fascinated by your project, Double Site. And when it comes up, I'll show it to you all. But if you've seen a project of a column with another leaning column on it, that's Double Site. It's in Princeton. And you're taking on a controversial figure in a controversial time when these students are trying to take down his name from their school building, and that's Woodrow Wilson. And you present the good and the bad. You don't say, no, I'm not going to do a monument. Well, it's not a monument. I'm not going to do this project. I'm going to present this guy, the good and the bad, in a way that opens him up to be reviewed and presents all these different viewpoints. And I love that you don't just say, I'm just not going to do this. You take it on. Yeah. And I think it's such a great strategy for all of us to be thinking about how to deal with these troublesome monuments. Perfect timing.
Yeah, I mean, if you've been to the School of Public Policy, there's no name on the building. That was the first thing when I went there. I was like, oh, say, where's his name? It's just not there, right? So the students only knew it right through the entablature somewhere that has his name. But when this was a competition, and we were like, okay, let's do it. And we didn't expect to win, like most competitions, but we had an idea. And I was in studio one day, and I took a square, cut it along the diagonal, and I made one black and one white. And I made the black one. It was going to be his age, so it was like 69 feet tall or whatever when he died. And then I let the white one rest. And that's all I wanted to do. But the brief was like, talk about Woodrow Wilson's good side and bad side. That was their brief.
Oh, that was their brief.
That was their brief because the trustees were like, okay, here's $1 million, guys. Let's do a competition, and we can be done with this, right? And so to me, that was such a powerful thing where it was one thing that became two things. And then the two things created this space. And when you cut along a diagonal, you get the widest dimension of the triangle. And so that was a way for us to use double consciousness, Dubos's double consciousness, to give him a conscience. And this idea of opening Wilson up. So on the inside is all of his detractors, Trotter, Susan B. Anthony, Ida B. Wells, people who were telling him, it was almost like a figure we had in our life a few years ago, oh, he will get better. The office would make him better. And there's all of this optimism. And of course, he didn't change. He actually got worse. And he did some good things, our university system, the League of Nations, but he also showed racist movies in the White House. He didn't stop the lynchings that were going on. Women's suffrage, he watched women stand out in front of the White House for his terms in the snow, rain, or whatever, and he just ignored them. And so the piece basically, working with the university, we took all of his writings, and I had remembered in Egypt the cartouches, right? And so I was thinking about creating this endless text that didn't have a beginning or end. So if you wanted to know about Wilson, you can just go up to it and just start reading. And it's unedited. So some of the stuff is flowery and some of the stuff is like really bad. It's like really. And when we were done, they chose to unveil it on Black Student Union Week. And I was like, why would you do that? And of course, all my peeps showed up in the audience. I'm down here with the dean, and man, they were like, we want his name off the building. Mr. Hood, nice sculpture, but we don't care. We want his name off the building. And that was in 2019. A year goes by, George Floyd happens, and I think the trustees meet again. And one of the trustees gets up out of the meeting and goes out and looks at the piece. And she reads some stuff. She comes back in, and she changes her mind, changes the vote. The name comes off. I get this email from the dean literally telling me that. And I was like, wow. And that was that moment, right? A year had gone past, but the piece did its work to a certain degree. The students were elated that the name was gone, right? And so it was a tough project, but it was one of those projects where we learned a lot doing it about the simplicity of an idea, right? That you can just be kind of clear about.
Well, again, you didn't shy away from it. And it reminds me of a project that I didn't research that much, so I might get the details wrong, but it's the one with the bales, that were carved out of stone, and you left, well, you actually exposed, I guess, the monument. There was a monument to, I don't know who.
Daughters of the Confederacy.
And it was all brambled over with shrubs and things, and you cleaned it up, and it stayed for a while.
It stayed for 20 years.
You let it live with your
Well, it stayed until George Floyd. And George Floyd hit, and man, everything is coming down. Daughters of the Confederacy, get rid of all this stuff. And this was done in the 90s,
But why did you choose to, maybe you could you have chosen to remove it, or?
I could have, but they wouldn't have done it. This is Macon, Georgia, right? This is like middle Georgia, county courthouse, right? It wouldn't have happened. And they were freaked out that I took the opposite approach. Like they had kind of disguised it a little bit, right? Put shrubs around it so you didn't see the entablature. It was just an obelisk. We removed the shrubs. We built a fountain, made it like pop, right? And then we put the bales of cotton beside it because I wanted there to be this dialectic, right, that happened. And I remember on opening day, this woman comes and goes, what are these things? I'm like, they're bales of cotton. And she's like, And then I get black-faced at the club. The guy comes, I only heard the secondhand. When we won the competition at the city club, this guy puts a Hawaiian shirt on, puts a mop over his head, and he comes out, hi, I'm Walter Hood. I'm from Berkeley, California, and we're doing Macon Yards.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And I started getting these emails. It's like, Mr. Hood, I don't think you want to come to Macon. But that was the precursor for the project.
Wow.
And so that gives you a sense of it's not that long ago, right? That's the context. Yeah. And you see why the transformation happened a few years ago is that we're still dealing with this stuff in ways that we don't even know, right? And I think it's so easy to take something down. Right? Versus understanding, one, why is it there? Why do we even want to maintain it? And if we want to maintain it, what's the conversation around it?
And I think that brings me a great segue to this question, this idea of multiple narratives. It isn't just about one narrative, right? It isn't just about the right narrative or the right narrative today, but looking at all the different sides and points of view from history. And back in 1993, we talked about this a little bit, this little book where you used improvisation in this case, and today you talk about hybrids, double consciousness, double negatives. and that double negatives are good, and even opposition is good. So, well, I think you've already talked about why this works as a strategy.
Yeah, and I think we don't listen enough to how we talk about the world. We don't see the world differently. I mean, I remember working in San Jose, and Hargraves was doing Plaza Park, which is downtown. And I never thought about it, Plaza Park, right?
It's a double
negative.
Okay.
Right? How can a plaza be a park? Right? And when you start thinking about it, you know, our language then has become so inept to describe space. And so when we were working on Lafayette Square Park in downtown Oakland, I had that memory, and so I was like, okay, why did it become a park? And in the late 19th century, the squares of London were greened because they became privatized residential squares, but they also wanted to get rid of certain people, right? So if you have a big paved area, anyone can come in and do anything, right? But if you put grass in it, oh, okay, not everyone can do it. I think there's a plan for, like, in front of City Hall to become a big soccer field or something like that. But in a way, that's saying, okay, we want to control the spaces. And so this idea of green came into the city very early, not as a sustainable idea, but it was one of control, right? And so when you started then thinking about Lafayette Square Park, by the time it becomes a park, people are asking for green stuff. And so it was a square up until like the 20s, I want to say, and that's when they started planting trees. And then they did the X pathways, which you'll see, right? And that forces people to promenade. So no more can you come in and do these other things. You have to walk, sit, smell the flowers, right? And then slowly they started adding other things through the Park and Rec. They added a bathroom building and some other things and added a playground. And all of a sudden, the plaza became a park. It's only an acre and a half, right? And so when you then think about parks, and particularly in the late 20th century, parks, people were arguing that they had to be at least 500 acres to do their job, or 1,000 acres. And so just if we start critiquing how we think and talk about our world, you'll see a lot of bias tied into it, but you'll also see how people, not designers, are advocating for things. And it's through the language, because a lot of the language is actually coming from people and not from the bureaucracy. And so it was called Old Man's Park for a long time. And it's like, why is it called Old Man's? Well, during the Depression, guys out of work would hang out there. And they weren't old either. I mean, they were like guys, but they were called old men because I guess they stayed there for 20 years. But if you go to Lafayette Square today, there's still old black men in the park. And that, to me, is a sign of success. Right? That continuation of that cultural history has very little to do with the physicality, but old men have been there, and there's women there too, but these guys have been there for pretty much the 20th century. And now, of course, certain people want to put in bocce courts and all of these things, but they're like, no horseshoes, keep the horseshoes. So.
I love how you challenge even the naming, right?
Yeah.
I think you talked, I think this was maybe in a lecture I was listening, where you couldn't do what you wanted to do as a landscape, so you called it a garden, and then you were able to put all these plants in and things like that, and then you were hired to design a trail in Jackson, Wyoming, and you were at the site, and it wasn't quite working as a trail, so you called it a terrace, and then the trail kind of worked.
And I was just there last week.
Oh, nice.
And they still call it a trail, right? But I'm giving this lecture, and they were like, this woman was like, I went to your website, and you called it a terrace. And there's a new curator, and she's like, we're changing this thing to terrace because we love that. And that was the previous director who didn't want to change it because the donor had given money for a trail. But it's a terrace, right? It's a terrace.
We all know that we got to work with clients. What's our time check?
I think Q&A came up.
Okay.
Yep. There's Q&A button. Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Wow, you guys have graphics, man. Look at that.
Yeah. All thanks to Yana, actually. She was the back of house as well as our MC today. All right, we're going to open it up to questions. We have a couple of microphones roaming around. So just raise your hand and we'll get to you. Fun.
You guys
I did-
don't ask questions.
I had one or two questions left. So.
Well, if they don't ask, you can ask.
Yeah, there you go.
There's no questions. That's good.
I was thinking about this while you were talking. Do you have any recommended books? Because I feel like a lot of the things that you've talked about have come from your studies. Is there anything that you could maybe
Recommend
reference?
books. That always happens at the end of my favorite podcast with Ezra Klein. He asks his guests, what are your three favorite books, or three books that you would recommend?
3 books that I would recommend. Wow. Black Landscapes Matter. No, I'm just
Yes.
kidding. Third rendition, of course. Get to the
It's
fourth.
Concise and small.
But I would recommend Svetlana Boehm's Nostalgia. She's from the GSD architecture program. She passed away, I think, about a decade ago, but it's a really wonderful work. I'll just tell you what I'm reading now. Maybe that's better. I'm reading The Invisible Man again, which I always, if you've never read The Invisible Man, it's an amazing read. And I'm trying to think of, it's the history of St. Louis, and it's called The Scariest Place on Earth, the something place on Earth. It comes to me, but it's about the history of St. Louis. But what's great about that is, which I didn't know, St. Louis was the jumping off point for pretty much the West. And at one point in time, St. Louis had highest percentage of armory, where all the guns were made. I mean, if you just read the history, I just never thought about it that way. And the book starts out with the French settlers coming and seeing Cahokia, which is this huge mound building complex along the Mississippi, and they immediately said it was vacant. And that kind of stayed with me, because once they said it was vacant, they could cut it down. And that is the story of the West. So those would be mine.
Wow.
Other than the paycheck, how has teaching influenced your designs?
The students, the undergraduates are always the same age every year, right? And it's a really good, it has been a great context to understand how the world changed, right, every generation. And the students, I'm saying undergraduate. Sorry, guys. Because the students really are a reflection of our culture. And I just taught a 200-plus lecture course last semester, and the students were amazing. And to sort of hear what their issues are, it challenges you. They are way more concerned about the world than I was at 19. At 19, I just wanted to get to Friday, get to the party, go over to the girls' dorm. I mean, that was the world for me. But they're like, you know, these clothes, I'm going to wear them every day. I'm never going to, like, buy another set of clothes. I mean, they're like this conviction of, you know, of the world. They're just pretty amazing. And they force you then, you know, if you listen to them, they force you to reconcile and change. Not all professors do that, but they are, like, pretty amazing. They keep you young.
Yep, one way up there.
I really love your work. Just curious, you made a strong point, just being mindful of obviously problem solving with design. So you kind of noted how you intentionally create spaces that are specific kind of to that user that you're considering. Just kind of keeping that in mind in regards to some of the spaces you create with almost an intent for design for education. How do you essentially reconcile sometimes that dilution of that educational space, either with the tourism, the gimmicky approaches to seeing it, or if you're not in architecture and design, you actually miss kind of the poignant moments in the space, the creativity, and actually developing solutions that are contradicted either through the client or just the user themselves.
I think I understand the question, that, you know, a lot of times we're asked to be highly pedagogical in a space, right? public art has become this, right, where you got to tell a story, right? There's got to be a clear narrative that everybody gets it. And that's really tough because it just kills design. And so, again, we try to challenge our clients. You know, some are more receptive than others. And we try to be a little, I wouldn't say subversive, but we try to sort of not tell the client everything, right? So that there
Kinda like
is,
Herzog.
yeah, that there's something that you might go to say and go, oh, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But that might not be something we might talk about in the presentation to the client. And I think trying to find those little places to leave something, right? That's not about educating people, right? Because to me, that kind of just kills the spirit of interpretation. Like that hill at Lafayette Square, there's a circle there, right? We were inspired because there was, the Chabot Observatory was there before, right? And it was a 70-inch lens or whatever, but that was just an inspiration for a landform. And of course the client kept saying, we gotta put a sign there, we gotta put a sign. I'm like, no, we don't. And then, 15 years later, there's a sign. But it's funny when there wasn't a sign, people would just come and go, that's kind of cool. I came there one day, there was someone drying their clothes on it. I came there on another day, there were kids playing football because it was the right height that you throw a ball over, you didn't see the person, you just saw the ball appearing. One day I went, there was a guy on a motorcycle, the cop was sitting on a motorcycle surveying. But if the sign was there, none of that stuff would have happened. Yeah. And so really trying to kind of work through a lot of those things. So sometimes that research, we don't want to put it on the Moreau board, right? We just want to keep that for ourselves.
Yeah.
But that's really tough because it's kind of like everybody gets treated like they're in the second grade, right? Out in the world. It's like everyone has to know what this means. And that in a way gets in the way of experience. So.
Yeah. All right, Lisa has a question down here.
Yo, Lisa.
Ooh, I feel really special.
Talk loud and I can repeat your question.
Okay, I loved how you talked about how important memory was. And I think we can all relate to a favorite memory or a private memory. When you look at your body of work, is there one thing that takes you back to like a favorite memory, whether it's a happy one or a sad one or, just one that was life-changing for you?
Did everybody hear that question?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Good acoustics.
It's actually, I'm sitting looking at the projects. When I look at the projects, I don't see the projects. I see the people that I've worked with to make the projects, if that makes sense. And those are the memories to a certain degree, because I don't like going back to projects. I don't know about you guys. It's kind of like I see everything that was wrong, right? But I do like to remember the process. Like I was telling someone when we were doing the Broad Museum, I remember Eli, saying, not good enough. Not good enough, just challenging to the point I'm like, dude, make up your mind. But it was that's that memory that I remember, and we wouldn't have arrived at that product without that process. And so I see, when I look at the projects, I see process. The ones that are not built, I see, let's build, get the thing done, right? I mean, so it's less the admiration of the thing made and much more of the experience of making. So. Yes, ma'am.
All right, one, two.
I don't know if this is a correct assessment, but it's from what I feel like I was able to gather with what you were saying about how there's this kind of privilege to kind of disregard and turn away and really directly position a project. And I'm wondering if you think it's more so a reluctancy to be vulnerable. It kind of seems the way you talk about your work is really more of like a sacred type of ritual. And I'm wondering if you think that is what needs to be injected in order to really frame and design spaces to be places that we can live together.
maybe I'm not going to answer your question, but this idea of privilege, the way I was meaning it was, I have colleagues, in the world that don't think about people when they're designing a space. I find that I cannot not think about people, right? And that's a privilege. And at times I'm like, how do I get that gene, man? God, I'm tired of thinking about people. It'd be really nice to sit down and do a work and be like, look at my shit, man. This is awesome. And just put it out into the world. That would be like, that's privilege. And I just think I can't do that. And I've tried, okay, just, and it's like, it's a little birdie, you can't do that. What about, and so that's a privilege. And I would push you, if you don't hear those voices, then something's wrong, particularly if you're in the design profession. If you're designing for a family, if you're designing for a community, this is why we make our work. We don't make work just for ourselves, right? If we didn't have these clients, if we didn't need habitation in any kind of environment, we wouldn't be doing what we do. Mm-hmm. And so that was the wonderful thing about the lockdown, was to kind of see how the world would just take care of itself. We're the ones who are screwing it up, right? And I don't know about you guys, but it was kind of nice to hear birds and, just not hear airplanes, and to actually see people walking in your neighborhood that you had never seen before in your neighborhood, even though you had lived there for 100 years. But it's those kinds of things that, for me, is like fighting that privilege. And I think a lot of it does come through our institutions. A lot of it comes through our professional institutions of how we give praise to individuals versus the work. And so I do think it's just a really tough and challenging, I think, place to want to be.
Okay, very, very last question. We got to get to cocktail hour.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to have to read my question. You seem to imply with your Mississippi memory metaphor, which I really appreciated, that narrative eliminates complexity and like the truer emotion of an actual memory. What does design without narrative look like, and is that part of the goal? You talked a lot about situational design. Is situational design basically an unseen narrative, or is there more? Is there things other than narrative that you feel are implicated?
Huh. That's interesting to think of design without a narrative, right? And I go back and forth with the term narrative because it is a kind of a narration, right? That you want to reveal something or say something. And I do think all design says something, whether it's a beautiful doorknob. I used to be into doorknobs, and I was like, why did this person create this doorknob out of glass? Or like these glass crystal doorknobs versus the smooth brass ones? There had to be a story behind this somehow. And those are things that I guess I'm just curious about, and I think all designers are curious to a certain degree. But I like using the term story more than narrative, because I do think there are lots of stories to be told, right? And some of the stories can be fictions, they could be truths. I think narrative starts to force it more towards the truth than the fiction, right? It's almost like the narrative, you have to tell the truth, right? Versus, just spin a yarn. Just tell me anything and make me feel good, maybe. That's a better way of thinking. So I do think it's something always in design, and it's what the other question was. I just don't think we have to always reveal what the story is, right? We let people figure it out, and if they don't, okay, it's fine, right? Maybe we've done our work.
Or we give them pieces of the story. Yeah. All right. Thank you,
Well,
Walter.
thank you, interior design people. So hopefully in your next project, you will play with the landscape architects.
All right. And don't hire Walter if you want a trail.
Yes,
and
don't.
You're gonna get a terrace. Hey, we've got cocktails. Enjoy the Mohawk cocktail. There's wine and beer, and it's open until 9 or so. So please enjoy. Thank you. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
You want me to help you with that?